Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the story's history left behind. Let's begin.
If you celebrate Christmas, at least in the modern sense, you pretty much know the aesthetic, right? You've got Santa Claus, the red suit, maybe a sleigh, and definitely a predictable list of toys.
That's very clean,
very polished. It's a predictable transaction all wrapped up in a nice little bow. But what if I told you that in certain pockets of America, the Christmas tradition features a visitor who is decidedly not jolly.
Not jolly at all.
He wears tattered furs, carries a big stick, and frankly, looks like he might have been dragged backwards out of a snowstorm.
And if you've heard that name, Belsnickel, recently, your only frame of reference is probably, let's be honest, an eccentric paper salesman on a popular sitcom.
Threatening to judge his coworkers as impish or admirable.
That's the one.
Exactly. And that surprising modern recognition of the name Belsnickel, which we owe almost entirely to that one very specific pop culture moment. That's our hook today.
It really is.
It takes this deep dive from being, a purely historical footnote to wait, that weird, terrifying thing on TV is actually based on centuries of tradition moment.
And that is precisely our mission. We've pulled together a fascinating stack of sources. We're talking folklore histories, anthropological accounts from Pennsylvania Dutch communities, and even documentation of his recent resurgence.
I want to unpack this really complex figure.
Yeah, we want to understand who Belsnickel is, where he came from in the old world, and maybe most importantly, why he struck such deep, enduring roots right here in Pennsylvania.
And then how this ragged, fur-clad judge went from being a truly terrifying household visitor to a slightly niche yet globally recognized pop culture icon.
It's quite a journey.
It is. So let's start with an immediate identity snapshot, because Belsnickel is just. He's defined by contradiction. Our initial sources paint him as this crotchety, fur-clad figure, basically the antithesis of the modern Santa.
Right. But crucially, he delivers both punishments. That's the threat, and sometimes the occasional use of a birch switch in rewards.
The
treats, fruits, small coins, that combination is absolutely central to who he is.
So he occupies what one of our sources calls an uneasy middle ground.
That's a perfect description. He is neither wholly benevolent, like, the St. Nicholas that eventually evolved into Santa Claus, nor is he purely sinister, like some of his darker European cousins.
His entire function is to visit homes before Christmas to check on behavior.
Yes.
He's like the original pre-holiday accountability judge.
And that timing is vital. You said it. He's not waiting for Christmas Eve.
No.
His traditional role was to show up 1 to 2 weeks before December 25th. His whole job was to set the moral tone and reinforce good behavior right as the holiday season was peaking.
Get everyone in line before the big day.
Exactly. And before I move on to his origins, it's worth noting just how fluid his identity was. The sheer variety of names we found in the sources tells you everything about how regional and localized this tradition was.
Right. It wasn't standardized at all. We found Belsnickel,
Belsnickel,
Christkinkle.
and the most surprising one.
Oh, the one we absolutely have to get to later when we talk about the American accounts is that sometimes he was known as the Christmas woman.
The variability is just. It's striking. It speaks to the theatrical, community-driven nature of the custom.
Okay, so let's unpack this history. We need to establish his old world origins, because to really get Belsnickel, you have to understand a very specific strain of German immigration and folklore.
Let's do it.
The name itself is the first big clue, right?
Sure.
The etymology is basically a direct translation of his defining characteristics.
It is. The German word Pels, or bells, translates to fur or hairy pelt.
And Mickel.
Nickel is just a common German diminutive for Nicholas, a nickname for St. Nicholas. So he is quite literally Nicholas with the fur.
Nicholas with the fur. It perfectly encapsulates his duality. He's associated with the benevolent St. Nicholas figure.
But that association is immediately filtered through this wild, unpolished, almost animalistic appearance that's defined by fur.
It suggests a merging of Christian holiday traditions with something older, something rougher. Maybe pagan or winter spirit imagery.
I think that's a fair assumption. And geographically, the sources pin him to a very specific area of German-speaking Europe. The folklore of the Palatinate region, the Pfalz, in southwestern Germany.
So we're talking about the areas along the Rhine, the Saarland, and the Odenwald area of Baden-Württemberg.
Exactly. This isn't some broad national German tradition. It's fiercely regional.
And that specificity is key to understanding why it survived, isn't it?
It's everything. The people who emigrated from the Palatinate in the 18th century, they were often responding to specific economic and political pressures. They brought with them a very specific, tightly held cultural identity.
The Palatinate was a contested area, right? Lots of conflict.
Constantly. Frequent conflicts, waves of poverty. It all encouraged strong communal bonds and a real reliance on internal, family-centered traditions just like Belsnickel. So when they left, they guarded this tradition like a piece of their original identity.
And we can actually track those migratory patterns centuries later. The sources note that the Belsnickel tradition exists today, not just in Pennsylvania, but also in Brazilian German communities.
And even parts of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia.
Wherever those Palatinate immigrants settled and managed to maintain their culture.
Now, in the broader, the very complex tapestry of German Christmas folklore, Belsnickel is related to a whole family of figures. They're often called the companions of St. Nicholas.
These are the darker figures who help Nicholas mete out justice.
That's them. Our sources suggest Belsnickel may have evolved from, or at least been influenced by, an older figure, Knecht Ruprecht.
Farmhand Ruprecht.
Right. He's often depicted as a servant of St. Nicholas, and he originated mostly in northern Germany. Belsnickel, by contrast, was a Rhine province tradition.
But here is the critical difference. And this is where Belsnickel's uniqueness and his unpredictability really come out.
This is the key. Unlike Ruprecht or other more sinister figures, Belsnickel does not accompany St. Nicholas. He visits alone. Alone. In fact, historically, in the Palatinate tradition, Belsnickel might be the only visiting figure, not one half of a duo.
Wait, so the moral duties aren't split. In so many other traditions, you have Nicholas rewarding and the scary companion punishing.
Exactly.
But Belsnickel, because he comes alone, he takes on both roles. So he is simultaneously holding the switch and offering the candy.
Yes.
That must create an enormous psychological tension for the children.
It absolutely does. The sources all highlight that he combines these threatening and benign aspects into one single unpredictable figure. He is the entire moral economy condensed into one man in a fursuit.
He's the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury.
All in one. The unpredictable nature is his primary tool.
This also helps us distinguish him really clearly from the modern popular figure of Krampus, right? Because our sources mention Belsnickel is sometimes seen as an amalgamation of the forgiving St. Nicholas and the punishing Krampus, but they're very different.
Fundamentally different, yes. Krampus, who's also had this massive popular resurgence, is a half-goat, half-demon figure. He's a supernatural monster designed to terrify and historically sometimes even carry children away.
Belsnickel isn't a demon.
No. Belsnickel is rough-hewn, and he's scary, but he is fundamentally a human in a costume. He's a manifestation of community judgment.
So he's a moral force, not a monster from hell.
That's a great way to put it. The distinction between a communal tradition and supernatural horror is essential here.
And this resilient tradition, this fur-clad judge, it traveled across the Atlantic. The historical timeline confirms its deep roots in America.
It arrived with German-speaking immigrants in the 18th century, and we know it was active in Pennsylvania as early as the early 1800s. It wasn't some invention of American regionalism. It was a foundational import.
It survived intact because it traveled with an isolated, tightly knit group that was determined to maintain their language and their customs.
That unbroken thread leading directly from the Palatinate region into the American countryside brings us to the most visceral, the most defining, and honestly the most spectacular part of the Belsnickel tradition.
The visit itself.
The highly dramatic process of his visit.
Indeed. We need to go into some extensive detail on the encounter because the whole function of Belsnickel relies on the sensory experience, the intense atmosphere he generates, and that moral tension he creates inside the home.
It's all about the performance.
Let's begin with the intentional aesthetic, the anti-Santa look. The sources are very clear that Belsnickel is designed to be unsettling. He's the rough-hewn counterpart to the jolly, comfortable figure of St. Nicholas. His appearance is critical to establishing his authority.
Absolutely. Everything about his garb emphasizes nature, chaos, and maybe even a bit of poverty. He is described as ragged and disheveled.
Not the clean red velvet we associate with Christmas.
Not at all. He's often wearing torn, tattered, and dirty clothes. His costume is typically a haphazard cloak of assorted furs or pelts, maybe a possum, raccoon, or Fox, often just held together at the waist with a rope or a leather cord. It looks stitched together by necessity, not by a tailor.
And the accessories just add layers to this primal wild image. He wears a fur cap, sometimes fashioned from a bear or wolf skin.
Sometimes decorated with loud bells to announce his presence, which adds to the auditory scare factor.
The most dramatic detail, which you find in some accounts, is that his hat is crowned with deer antlers or other natural decorations.
Right, so he truly looks like a shaman or a wild man, emerging directly from the cold winter woods to pass judgment.
And the face is where the real theatricality lies. It can't be a known face.
No, the identity of the person underneath has to be completely obliterated, so his face is often blackened with soot or burnt cork.
Other accounts describe him using a hideously ugly mask, or what a 19th century source called a fizz.
A fizz, yeah. These masks were deliberately grotesque and imposing, often featuring exaggerated snouts or terrifying expressions. They were designed not just to scare, but to maintain the mystery and the authority of the judge.
The whole ensemble was meant to ensure that children could not look into the eyes of the man and see their neighbor.
Exactly. And he's also characterized by a long, messy, scraggly beard and tangled hair, further obscuring the human underneath. The whole point is to present this figure of overwhelming, unpolished, and slightly chaotic authority.
So now let's move to the dramatic entrance, which relies so heavily on sound and surprise.
As we established, he visits 1 to 2 weeks before Christmas. The visit is meant to shock the children into a state of immediate heightened morality.
And the first hint of his arrival is usually the most effective psychological tool. It's the sound.
It's the tapping of his long, flexible birch switches on the windows outside. Imagine that sound, a sharp tap, 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 piercing the quiet of the night. It immediately builds this intense anticipation and unease inside the home.
The sound comes first. It signals the imminent arrival of the judge.
Then comes the chaos. He doesn't knock gently. He bursts through the door, sometimes amid a lot of door banging and bell ringing.
The sources describe his entrance as having a chaotic energy, with jerky, sudden movements.
Yes, and he uses a gravelly, disguised voice. He immediately begins menacing the children with these probing questions. He just rushes into the domestic space, instantly creating a sense of urgency and threat that demands their immediate attention.
And he arrives equipped with his two tools, which embody the paradox of the whole thing. In one hand,
he carries the long hazel switch or a bundle of birch rods, and its power is primarily symbolic, but that symbolism had real weight.
Oh, the 19th century accounts confirm this was much more than just a prop.
Right. That account from Allegheny County, Maryland, around 1830, it details the tension perfectly. It noted that children felt him, or rather his stripes upon their backs with his switch.
But, and this part is fascinating, it says the children, in an effort to show courage and diligence, would not show a wince.
And the writer adds that the switch was supposed to have some kind of a charm in it, as well as a sting.
So the threat was real enough to enforce compliance, but the delivery of the discipline was typically measured. Just enough to sting, enough to be memorable, but not enough to cause genuine harm.
It's a physical symbol of judgment and consequence.
But then, in his other hand, he clutches the rewards.
Right. A sack or pockets just full of small treats. These are things like small cakes, candies, nuts, dried fruits, and sometimes small coins. They were meant to be simple, accessible rewards, reinforcing the value of humility and simple pleasures.
So the entire visit is, therefore, this highly pressurized moral test. This is the core function of the Belsnickel.
He's reinforcing core values like honesty, diligence, and respect. And the sources assure us he always knew exactly which of the children misbehaved.
Which, of course, derived from the community knowledge of the person playing Belsnickel.
Of course.
He quizzes the children so intensely, demanding an accounting of their virtues and behaviors throughout the year. The questions are pointed and specific.
Yeah, things like, have you been kind to your siblings? Did you do your chores without complaining? Have you respected your elders? Have you cleaned your room?
The most telling demand, the one that really puts the children on the spot, is, what good deeds can you recount?
He demands active evidence of moral uprightness. He's making the child perform their virtue right there on the spot.
And this public accounting was just crucial to the lesson. Naughty children might have to perform penance to prove their repentance.
Like reciting a Bible verse, a prayer, or a poem. This required them to perform their education and their spiritual diligence under intense pressure in front of their family and this terrifying judge.
But the most dramatic, and I would argue the most psychologically ingenious part of the moral test is sometimes how he delivers the treats.
The infamous treat scramble.
Yes. He wouldn't just simply hand them over to the good children.
No, not at all. In a sudden burst of activity, he would toss the goodies onto the floor, leading to this immediate chaotic scramble among the children. And the trap here is so subtle, but so profound.
The reward is right there, literally at their feet. But if the children jumped too quickly, or if they lunged immediately, or showed any excessive greed by scrambling wildly for the treats,
they risked getting instantly struck on the back or knuckles with the switch.
it's a masterful piece of folk psychology. The test wasn't just about their past behavior. The final crucial test was whether they could demonstrate composure, humility, and a lack of greed, even when faced with a sudden, tempting reward.
The Belsnickel provided a perfect, immediate consequence system. The reward is available, but impatience or avarice will be instantly penalized.
The children were forced to weigh the excitement of the treat against the immediate risk of the switch.
That one moment, the scrambling on the floor while risking the sting of the switch, it perfectly encapsulates the Belsnickel's nature. It's a system of earned rewards and instant accountability.
It elevates the holiday visit from just a simple passive gift reception to an intense personal moment of moral reckoning that they would remember all year long.
And this intense, highly disciplined tradition wasn't merely fleeting. It survived for centuries in the New World, thanks almost entirely to the resilience of one specific cultural group.
Which brings us to the unique American preservation story.
The Pennsylvania Dutch.
The enduring survival of Belsnickel is inextricably linked to the history of immigration, specifically that German influx into colonial Pennsylvania. When those German-speaking people arrived in the 18th century, they brought their regional traditions with them.
And their descendants, the Pennsylvania Dutch, preserved Belsnickel more faithfully than almost anywhere else in the New World.
It's important that we pause and clarify that name for our listener, because Pennsylvania Dutch is a bit of a linguistic misunderstanding.
It is. It comes from the German word for German, Deutsch. These were German immigrants, primarily from the Palatinate region we just discussed, not people from the Netherlands.
Yeah, this Germanic identity was a cohesive force that helped them maintain their cultural distinctiveness.
Which is critical context for Belsnickel's survival. While the rest of America was rapidly moving toward the standardized Anglo-American tradition of the jolly, clean, and commercial Santa Claus, Belsnickel endured in these specific, isolated regional strongholds in Pennsylvania.
The sources specifically call out south-central Pennsylvania. So we're talking Lancaster County, York County, Lebanon County, and Berks County as being key areas where this tradition stayed vibrant.
These communities were insulated, they prioritized their language, and they really resisted the cultural homogenization that swept through other parts of America. Belsnickel became an identifier of their specific regional heritage.
And you can see why it fits so well within the Pennsylvania Dutch culture. The tradition aligns perfectly with their core values.
Absolutely. Humility, discipline, honesty, thrift, and communal responsibility.
Belsnickel's methods, demanding accountability, enforcing moral tension, were just a natural fit for a culture that emphasized diligence and plain living over, ostentation and consumerism.
He was a moral tool first and a holiday figure second.
Which leads us to the crucial community role in the tradition. Belsnickel wasn't some mythic figure in the sky.
Not at all. He was often portrayed by a local adult or an older teenager in disguise. This made the experience hyper-local, personalized, and deeply meaningful because the authority was vested in the community itself.
And the person selected for this role was not chosen at random. The sources tell us they were usually someone who had a deep insider knowledge of exactly what the children had been up to during the year.
This is the source of Belsnickel's perceived omniscience. It wasn't magic. It was based on neighborhood gossip, communal observation, and shared accountability.
Being chosen for this role was actually described as a social honor within the community.
But it came with immense responsibility. The person playing Belsnickel had to be highly trustworthy, capable of maintaining the mystery and the necessary stern demeanor, and, most importantly, able to properly gauge punishment.
They had to make sure the discipline was purely symbolic and educational.
Right. And to maintain the illusion, the disguise had to be effective. The mask, the soot, the furs, so that children were never entirely sure who he was, even if they suspected it was a neighbor. That uncertainty helped maintain the figure's authority.
And there's a fascinating performance element noted in the sources regarding the family dynamic.
Oh, the alibi.
The alibi. In many branches of the tradition, the father or an older male relative would be conspicuously, almost theatrically busy working outside or attending to some matter somewhere else in the house when Belsnickel arrived.
It's a believable, conspicuous alibi for the person who might be the most likely suspect to be playing the role.
And beyond the moral function, there was also a reciprocal sort of social safety net element to the tradition.
Yeah, the person playing Belsnickel was often rewarded with food, drinks, or hospitality for his service. It could function as a form of community elder support or charity, especially during the cold winter months.
So it wrapped local justice, moral instruction, and community support into a single, cohesive holiday custom.
We should also return to the fascinating variations in the tradition, specifically that Christmas woman alias you flagged earlier.
That 1830s account from Allegheny County, Maryland, is just invaluable here. It noted that the visitor, known sometimes as Belsnickel or Christkinkle, sometimes wore female garb and was known as the Christmas woman.
And the description is so striking. The visitor could be a veritable woman, but with masculine force and action.
What that detail confirms is that Belsnickel was not constrained by a rigid, singular male identity. The role was about the authority and the disguise, not the gender of the person underneath.
That flexibility just shows how deeply rooted and adaptable the tradition was within individual communities.
Unfortunately, despite all this resilience, the tradition did begin to decline pretty significantly toward the end of the 19th century, and especially during the first half of the 20th.
Several powerful forces converged to suppress Belsnickel.
Firstly, the World Wars. They fueled anti-German sentiment in the United States, leading many German Americans to consciously suppress or abandon their ethnic heritage, including their language and customs, in favor of assimilation.
And secondly, and perhaps even more powerfully, was the unstoppable rise of the standardized, commercialized Santa Claus figure.
Santa, promoted through national media, department stores, advertising. He offered a cleaner, less threatening and financially rewarding figure that was just easier to adopt nationwide.
Belsnickel, with his switch and his demands for virtue, he simply couldn't compete with the ease and comfort of modern Santa.
But the story doesn't end there with decline. There has been a very strong recent revival.
Driven by renewed interest in Pennsylvania, Dutch heritage, and folklore, the community recognized that something important had been lost and began consciously working to reclaim it.
Today, the figure survives in family storytelling, local reenactments, and historical events. And these aren't just dusty museum pieces. They're active efforts to make the tradition relevant again.
We see Belsnickel prominently featured in celebrations at places like the Quiet Valley Living Historical Farm in Stroudsburg, PA. They consciously keep the tradition alive during their old-time Christmas celebration.
And their descriptions are so vivid. Belsnickel arrives amid much door banging and bell ringing in the cellar kitchen, recreating the sensory fear of the original visit.
He's also a central character at the Christmas on the Farm program at the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center at Kutztown University in Berks County. And historical societies, like the Mannheim Historical Society, have embraced him. They've had a Belsnickel visit local businesses,
transforming him into a point of community pride and unique local identity.
This active preservation makes the contrast between Belsnickel and Santa Claus unavoidable. And our sources really emphasize this distinction as crucial.
Santa is polished, predictable, safe, and commercial.
Belsnickel is unpredictable, earthy, and he demands immediate personal accountability. He is essentially a living moral mirror held up to the child.
Santa rewards those who are, well enough behaved based on an assumed goodness. Belsnickel demands concrete, evidenced answers about chores, kindness, specific good deeds.
For the Pennsylvania Dutch communities, Belsnickel represented a more honest, community-driven moral force. The sources highlight that he provided a crucial moral tension that modern, consumption-focused Christmas traditions just lack.
And it is that precise moral tension, that unpredictable grit and genuine accountability that, ironically, has made him so appealing to modern pop culture.
Even if that culture largely encounters him first through a comedic lens.
Which is where we dive into his remarkable, completely unexpected recent cultural resurgence, where a local Pennsylvania tradition suddenly went global.
It's an amazing turn of events.
We can trace the primary driver of Belsnickel's global recognition directly back to television. The sources are definitive on this. The appearance in the Season 9 episode from 2012 Dwight Christmas of the Scranton-based sitcom The Office.
That's the one. That launched Belsnickel into the mainstream consciousness.
The character Dwight Schrute, who often highlighted his proud Pennsylvania Dutch heritage and, let's say, eccentricity.
A lot of eccentricity.
He decided to forego the standard office Christmas party for a more authentic celebration. And dressing up in furs and soot as Belsnickel was a perfect and perfectly jarring extension of that character's identity.
The scene works so well because it humorously showcases the figure's core function, deciding if his co-workers were impish or admirable.
The humor comes from transposing this severe folkloric judge directly onto the mundane, modern corporate office environment.
Exactly. Dwight, clad in ragged pelts and wielding the switch, maintained Belsnickel's stern questioning and gruff demeanor. In doing so, he introduced the entire character to a huge global audience who had never, ever heard the name before.
The comedic portrayal, while obviously exaggerated for effect, it successfully leveraged the most recognizable quirks of the folklore.
The strange furs, the switch, the intense moral judgment. For many viewers, Belsnickel's appearance was their first realization that there existed this vibrant, alternative, non-Santa holiday tradition right in the middle of America.
It's a great moment of cultural translation, taking a deeply regional, centuries-old custom and making it legible and funny to millions.
But the tradition hasn't stayed confined to just that one sitcom reference. It has seeped into other media, too.
Right. We see film and literature adopting the figure, although it's often adapted to fit the demands of a new narrative.
Take the 2020 Netflix film The Christmas Chronicles 2. It featured Belsnickel, played by Julian Dennison, as a character central to the plot.
And notably, in that adaptation, Belsnickel was presented as the movie's main antagonist. He was a disgruntled former elf whose goal was explicitly to destroy Christmas.
Which demonstrates how modern media often isolates Belsnickel's rough, punishing side. They strip away his role as a rewarder and judge and emphasize him purely as a scary villain, the anti-Santa in its most extreme form.
Historically, the name actually popped up long ago in fantasy literature, which shows the name was in circulation, even if the image was a bit blurred.
Right. John R. Neal borrowed a variation of the name Belsnickel for an antagonist in his 1941 book, The Scalawagons of Oz.
A bizarre creature described as a large, bluish-green, flat object rolling on its edge like a cartwheel, wearing bells on its ears.
So a very distant echo, but the name clearly carried enough folkloric weight to be borrowed by fantasy authors decades and decades ago.
And then bringing it back to his authentic literary roots, the author Chet Williamson made a conscious effort to cement him back into regional holiday storytelling.
With his 2000 children's picture book, Pennsylvania Dutch Night Before Christmas.
And that represents the conscious internal effort to revive the tradition versus the external, often distorted pop culture adoption.
It's also fascinating to trace the international spread of his image even before the modern era. We found a 19th century English book, The Little Sister, from 1851, and it featured an illustration of Belsnickel.
And what did he look like?
He was shown in a long cloak, a pointed hood, fur around his neck, a long white beard, and carrying a big bag. It proves that the image of the fur-clad Nicholas traveled beyond the German-speaking diaspora long before the age of television, just circulating in children's literature as a European curiosity.
Moving from global media and literature to something far more localized and tactile, Belsnickel has become a favorite mascot for commercial use, right in his Pennsylvania home territory.
This is a local reclamation of the figure.
Specifically, Pennsylvania microbreweries have widely adopted the name for their seasonal beers. They recognize him as a symbol of regional, rustic heritage.
It transforms this figure of moral austerity into a symbol of local flavor and identity.
Stout's Brewing Company of Adamstown, PA, for example, brews a seasonal dark lager called Belsnickel Lager.
And Otto's Pub and Brewery of State College, PA, brews a specific Belsnickel ale.
These businesses are using the name to connect with that unique regional heritage and celebrate the Pennsylvania Dutch culture that distinguishes them from the big national corporate brands.
So you really see Belsnickel's full journey, from a genuine fan of fear and moral authority in the Palatinate,
to a fiercely guarded tradition in Pennsylvania Dutch country.
And finally to a cultural mascot, one that represents a rugged local identity completely distinct from the mass market Santa figure. His survival is really a testament to American regional resilience in the face of homogenization.
Okay, let's synthesize this incredible deep dive. We've followed Belsnickel's path all the way from the Palatinate region's fur-clad Judge Belsnickel to the enduring figure of fierce moral accountability in Pennsylvania Dutch country.
And finally to his remarkable contemporary life, bursting onto the global stage through sitcoms and holiday films.
I think the most enduring significance of Belsnickel is the window he offers into the history and the psychology of Christmas traditions.
It's a much deeper, far more nuanced perspective. He reminds us that the holiday was historically rooted in moral lessons, communal accountability, and discipline, rather than solely merriment or consumerism.
He's a living thread connecting our commercial present back to centuries-old immigrant traditions based on earning, not just receiving.
Right. And the sources highlight Belsnickel's importance because he represents a necessary moral tension and a community-driven tradition. He makes the child an active participant in the transaction.
He isn't just checking a list, he's demanding what good deeds can you recount, and judging if someone is impish or admirable. He forces a personal accounting of your year.
And you have to think back to that central moment, the treat scramble. The presence of the switch means the reward must be approached with caution and humility.
It's such a powerful metaphor for life. Rewards exist, but greed and impatience carry an immediate price.
This rough, honest tradition, a community member in a dirty mask wielding a switch, it survived precisely because it offered a tangible system of earned grace, standing strong against the polished, commercialized image of Santa Claus.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener. Belsnickel's survival really hinges on his role as an unpredictable, immediate judge who demands honesty and accountability.
So in your own life, when it comes to moral reflection and discipline, which kind of judge is actually more effective in motivating long-term good behavior?
Is it the predictable, always jolly rewarder who guarantees presence, regardless of any rigorous moral examination?
Or is it the unpredictable, earthy figure who carries the switch and demands a direct personal accounting of your deeds and whether you were impish or truly admirable?
Which version of Christmas with its inherent lessons do we truly need in a world of easy rewards?
That's a question of consequence for you to mull over.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.